Today I've got something very cool for you ZV1 users out there. This is the Gizmon extension tube and wide and macro conversion lens kit. Altogether the kit's going to cost you about £120, but in this video you're going to see why I think it's worth it. So I must admit, when I first got the ZV1 I was fully against adding anything like this to it to make it bigger and heavier. But after using the ZV1 for a while you do start to notice its drawbacks, and that's notably the fact that even though it's got ND filters built in, when you're out shooting in broad daylight, you will notice the ND filter doesn't really do much, which means you either have to increase the shutter speed or increase the aperture. Usually, most people will increase the aperture so the shutter speed stays correct, but then that means you don't get that nice depth of field. And although this kit does add extra size and weight to the ZV1, this solves that problem. So to get this kit working, you don't need to use adhesive. Instead, you just attach this bayonet mount to your ZV1 with an Allen key. And one thing that's quite cool is the bayonet mount does fit on the camera even with the small rig cage attached to it. So once you've got the bayonet adapter on, then you put on the extension tube. So like a lens, this just pops straight onto the bayonet mount and you just have to line up the red dot. But here's where this gets interesting. This extension tube has a 49mm thread at the end of it. This means that you can mount any lens filter attachment to the end of this extension tube, meaning you can add ND filters, graduated filters, pro mist filters, whatever you want to the end of your ZV1. So this could really take your ZV1 footage to the next level. You even get a little lens hood that can go on the end of this extension tube, and that may protect your ZV1 lens if you drop it, but it'll also block out some harsh sunlight to stop flaring on the lens as well. And I've got to say, I love that little Gizmon branding on the top of the extension tube. It looks really cool. Now there is one concern I have with this extension tube, but I don't think it's a big deal. Basically, your ZV1 lens is collapsible, right? So when you turn on the ZV1, it pops out, and this extension tube does a similar thing. So it actually does extend and retract. And the reason it does that is because if you had the wide angle lens on at the end, and then the lens didn't go back and forth, you're going to get vignetting and problems like that. So in my mind, when I first got this, I did think, is this going to cause issues with the ZV1's motor for the lens? So I contacted the company to ask them about this, and they basically said that they've sold thousands of units across Japan, and so far no one has made a complaint. Now, whether or not that's true, and whether or not, people have actually even noticed they've had an issue with their camera is yet to be seen. But I think the motor in the ZV1 is probably strong enough to handle this adapter. So let's take a look at that wide angle and macro lens. So this just simply screws on the end of the extension tube. This conversion lens is really nicely built. It's pretty much all metal, and it does add some extra weight to your ZV1, but to be honest, not enough that it would cause me issues. So this wide angle lens gives you 0.75 times magnification, which basically means if you're shooting at 24mm, it will now be 18mm with the wide angle conversion lens. That's fantastic for people that want to vlog, or even if you just want to get more stuff in your shot. And here's a few examples of how this looks in day-to-day use. Looking at those samples, it doesn't seem as if this lens affects the image quality in any negative way, and we still get the same kind of sharpness and colour. Now this lens does have the macro built in right underneath it, and to use the macro lens all you have to do is screw off the top part of the wide angle converter. And this lets you focus as close as 5cm with the ZV1 lens. And you can pick up some incredible detail with this. In one of my ZV1 videos before this, I mentioned how at 24mm you can get really close to your subjects with the ZV1 and it's in focus, which I found really good for doing close-ups in my videos. The one drawback of that is when you went to 70mm on the ZV1, the focus distance became much larger, which meant that you couldn't really get any macro photography at 70mm on the ZV1. But with this macro lens attached, you can get incredibly close at 70mm. In fact, with this lens, 70mm is actually the best focal length for macro photography. And if you're wondering about using filters with the wide angle, it does have a 62mm thread, so you can put ND filters, pro mist filters, and whatever you want on the end of it. So with this one kit from Gizmon, you basically get a wide angle, a macro lens, and the ability to add filters, ND filters, pro mist filters, whatever you want to the ZV1. My ZV1 has seriously leveled up. Oh, and before I forget, the wide angle also comes with a little carry case so you can take it around and make sure it's protected. Also, cool fact for you, this wide angle lens also works with Sony E-mount lenses that have a 49mm filter thread. So right now I'm shooting on the 24mm, and in a second we're going to change to the wide angle. So now I've got the wide conversion lens on my 24mm, and this is 18mm now. This is so wide now in my tiny little office. And one thing I noticed is the autofocus seems to work perfectly with my 24mm at least. I think it will vary depending on the lens, but for the 24mm, this works great. Obviously now it's a lot wider. You can see my mic boom arm in shot and probably some other stuff as well. But you get the idea. This works on full frame lenses as well, as long as you have a 49mm thread mount. And it'll also work on APS-C as long as you've got that 49mm thread. And this is so wide, I love it. I can't wait to try this for some landscape photography and other things as well. It's just really interesting to be able to get this, and it's not expensive either. Back on the 24mm. So are there any drawbacks from using this lens? Well, I mentioned earlier the pressure on the ZV-1 motors. Now, whether or not this will actually be a problem long term is yet to be seen, but from what I can imagine, it won't be much of an issue. But don't take that as advice. If you're someone that likes to make sure your kit is never really tampered with in any way, then maybe this won't be for you. But if you're someone that wants to experiment and just try it, then I definitely think this is worth getting. The other drawback is the fact that the ZV-1 is now basically the size of like a ZV-E10, but that's not really a big deal because the quick release button lets you take it off in like a second. And now the ZV-1's pretty much back to its original size, and we've still got the bayonet adapter on here, so we can just put the extension tube back on whenever we want. So that's pretty much it. That is the Gizmon extension tube and wide angle and macro conversion lens. I think this is a great piece of kit, and if you've got a ZV-1, I definitely think this kit's worth checking out, because if you're like me, you'll come to realize that ND filters are probably worth having with the ZV-1, and this also lets you use pro mists and any other filter that you want, and even the extra macro functionality. The ZV-1's already got good macro functionality, but this takes it to the next level. So will you be adding the Gizmon kit to your Christmas list? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, it really helps out my channel. If you want to see more from me, subscribe, hit that bell icon as well, and you'll be notified when I upload another video, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.